I'd like to just thank panelists for coming out today and start with Mike for short introductions for them to tell you a little bit about their backgrounds, and then we will get into some questions that have already been asked. I'll ask the panelists, and you'll have time for additional questions from the audience if you didn't have a chance to submit in advance. So Mike, if you introduce yourself.
Sure, good, thanks. Everyone hear me? So my name is Michael Lamberson. I'm with Johnson & Johnson, and my job is primarily on the healthcare professional side. Been in the healthcare industry about 15 years. Have worked in everything from large companies to small startups, and I'm happy to be here. My couple things that I think about are the acumen of digital is very different in at least my organization. I think a lot of others out there versus this room. So that's one thing I think about is how to raise that level of acumen. And I'm really here to learn a lot about that.
Actually, I'd like to add for the remaining panelists, you know, we're grateful that you came to share a lot of knowledge, but surely there's something that, you know, you meet people in the hall afterward, you'd love if they asked you about something or something you'd like to get out of it, and you'd like to just learn from everyone in the room that collected knowledge. Line?
Yeah, so my name is Line Berg Østergaard. I come from Denmark, so that's the reason for the weird name. I live currently in Switzerland, and there I work for Zimmer, and I head up our global digital marketing team. I'm passionate about digital and social, very much indeed. I think what I'm looking mostly forward for this conference is really that we as collective peers and industry work together collaboratively to really solve some of the issues we're all facing. So looking for some challenging questions and also good conversations.
Thank you. Kelly?
Hi, I'm Kelly Meyer, CEO of Qforma. I'm from southwestern Denmark, otherwise known as Texas. Qforma is an analytics and predictive modeling company. We focus our analytics on understanding how people interact in and around healthcare decisions, payers, providers, and patients. And our passion is finding ways to kind of turn data into wisdom, something you can evaluate and act on.
I'll just add quickly, again in the same vein, Kelly has had the opportunity to feed 49 other families by founding this company, so I personally appreciate that. Gail, Cook Medical.
I'm Gail McDaniel. I'm from Cook Medical, which is in Bloomington, Indiana. It's not very far from Denmark. In fact, I broke my arm there just last October. I started Cook's social media efforts. I do their LinkedIn pages, I handle their Twitter accounts, and various other social media events. I also am very involved with our advertising and promotion, regulatory and compliance programs, and doing the training for our various marketing staffs in that arena. And now I'm taking on a new digital role. I'm the first digital person that's embedded in one of the Cook's business units. So when I go back, I'm going to start doing whole new programs for specifically for a business unit. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Gail. You both met Berg. Do you care to add anything?
Just for a little reference, I'm a group marketing manager in peripheral interventions at Boston Scientific, focused on our core business. So we tend to be pretty lean and mean and lately launch heavy, and that's been where we've had a lot of this focus in some of the iOS apps.
Thank you. Jitesh?
Hi, my name is Jitesh Radke. I'm actually responsible for product strategy and innovation at CGD Relationship Management. And I'm going to actually take on Matt's session from this morning and then remind everybody of two things which he said. One was that he wanted to say that technology should not be the goal, it should be an enabler. And I also wanted to point out the fact that somebody mentioned that he's now on the dark side, that he's in sales. So what CGD Relationship Management tries to do is we try to do two things. We try to be an enabler for the technology so that you can do your job better or whatever you need to do by way of, maybe do B2B, discussions around digital profiling, knowing what Facebook, Twitter, your doctors are doing, be it CRM for medical device. And therefore we're trying to bridge the gap between the Jedi and the Empire so that, and basically, again, from my perspective, it's key for me to understand, from this conference, that what can I do to make your job easier, right? So I'm trying to learn what you guys do and what we can do better to make it easier for you guys to do what you do.
Thank you. So the first question is one that probably most of us have had to field one time or another, and it's one that I've already heard a half dozen times. Tell me about ROI. We bought into social media. We get it. You should talk in the conversation, I believe. But my CFO wants to know, what am I going to get back for it? Lena, would you start?
Yeah, I would love to. So I think we've already had quite a number of good examples today of people who managed to grab their arms around ROI. I'd like to kind of start out with saying, I think we need to stop saying, it's not possible, and think how it's possible. And I have 3 ideas of how we could kind of approach it. Of course, there's what I call the old school stats. So, visits or increase of visits over time or usage over time. We can look at that, maybe even compare it with some other data, from how the business is doing and start doing some likelihoods of how we, with what we do, impact. Then I like to look at what I call value. So here it would be looking into the sentiment, so really tapping into social media. What is the sentiment that's being said around what we're doing? Also, looking into that whole, how valuable do you think that is? So it's more a softer measure, and then the time spent using our digital tools, assets, what we do, and then finally, which I think we don't in Zimmer do enough of, but that's something we're going to focus on more, especially after some tips from today, is the whole leads and inbound marketing. I think especially the guys from Medtronic are doing that really well, and I'm happy we just had a guy join us from Medtronic that do that really well. So hopefully in the future we'll be doing that better.
Gail, I know you wanted to add something.
Could we look at ROO, the ROO, rather than the ROI? When I say ROO, it's the return on objective. Before we start a digital program or any kind of program that involves the web or whatever, we like to sit down and actually come up with the objectives that we want to measure. What do we want out of the program? And so then we have something that is tangible. It's really hard in the medical device world, and especially when you're dealing with purchasing organizations and you're dealing with purchasing units, and to figure out what you do actually affect a sale. So it's much easier to say, okay, well, if we wanted to reach 5,000 people in XYZ community, or the area or medical specialty, did we meet that goal? So we kind of taken that same ROI and looked at it in a different way. And we're also just getting ready to start a new program that's focused much more on lifetime customer value, which is the same kind of program that works in lots of industries as far as direct marketing goes. But it's actually looking at which one of our customers are actually bringing the most to the table, so that we may be able to balance the effectiveness. We may be able to allocate more resources to that particular segment. That I report back later, next year on that, see how that worked out for us, because it's kind of a difficult assignment. But I think we're going to be able to work it out.
I have a few thoughts on this myself, but instead of adding them, I'll instigate and ask the room. For those of you who've had this conversation with some financial type who wants to know the answer to what's the ROI, have you heard anything you could actually tell your CFO? You did. Okay, ROI, yes. How many of you are somewhat unsatisfied and don't feel ready to answer the ROI question? Okay, a few hands. So, what, any of you on the panel? Pressing on, yeah, okay, that was nice. Sorry, being an instigator. But really, I want to know, what's my payback on this thing? Where do you go?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I think we're all struggling with that. What I've seen, kind of the higher management structure that you go, you can get a lot further down the path by having, again, their acumen at a higher level. So there's a lot of things. You can throw a lot of squishy programs back to them and say, what's the ROI on that equity TV ad we did 5 years ago? They're not going to have an answer. So I think a lot of it is the reticence to really understand what, if someone wants to set up a brand Facebook page, the first thing they're going to say is, why would we do that? I mean, my kids use that. How is that going to help me grow my sales? So I think a lot of it is just getting their understanding up to a higher level of what some of these tactics are. And then you can actually start having the conversation. If you go in with a pure ROI mathematical equation, they're going to rip it apart. That's just been my experience.
I tend to definitely agree with that. That's why I know what I was saying was a bit, fluffy and not concrete. But at the end of the day, we can't look at what we're trying to do with the traditional. We spend this amount of dollars, and then we gain this amount of revenue to the business. We have to start coming up with metrics that measure in different ways, especially when it comes to the social media part. And we can't just say, well, we had this many people talk about us, so therefore we gained $1 million US to the company.
You know what?
She's right.
I'm just gonna, maybe ask a question in a slightly different way. I'm sorry, I'm playing this role as well a little bit.
Enjoy.
So I'm just trying to figure out, so is the ROI the only question, or can we ask it the other way around? So can we go talk to our management and tell them, what's the cost of not being on Facebook or not being on Twitter and not have the brand awareness that some of our competition is definitely trying to have, and does that help move that case along a little bit as well? Anybody has some thoughts?
I almost look at it a little bit the way that we look at an NPV, which you'll never have this perfect information looking forward. Just like that, it's actually very difficult in a lot of cases, especially if you're talking in a strategy that has multiple touch points. Which of these things actually move the needle? So just like it's hard to look forward with perfect information, it's actually quite difficult oftentimes to look backwards with perfect information. So acknowledging that, unless you have a strategy that you fire off a message and somebody immediately acts on it, which doesn't apply to most of the folks in this room, I think having a comprehensive way of looking at your investment ROI should be one of those tools, but you should be thinking about other pillars. I think return on objectives is perhaps one way to look at it, but specifying in advance how are we going to measure the success of our program, what are going to be those touch points, and having more of a nuanced view and getting that agreement up front that that's the correct way to look at things, because I don't know that you'll ever get the numbers to be as clean as you want them.
I'm just going to add on another thought to this too. And back in the old days, which I came from, we used to run print ads all the time. How many people ever ask you how you defend the ROI on a print ad that you ran? Probably not very often. And the thing is that when we go to the digital space for the very first time, we really have analytics and we have tools that can measure what we're actually doing. And just starting off from that point of measuring, even if it's elementary, is just saying, all right, this is how many people click through on something. That's data that we never had before. We haven't had. And so to go to the extent of, having to prove if it pushed the needle or not, we just start off at the very beginning. We're 2 steps ahead than where we were 20 years ago.
I'll throw a question back to the room. I'm curious if anyone's doing anything like an A/B test where you'd say, hypothetically, east of the Mississippi wants to get the tactic, west of the Mississippi they get nothing, and look at the results. Is anyone trying to do something like that to compare?
I don't know how you do that online. Oh, you can geo-target.
Yeah, we do some geo-targeting.
Who's speaking? Oh, there you are.
Okay. We do some geo-targeting like that, and we're basically just looking at the interactions, and then therefore do those interactions open up new doors and new relationships to us as a company. And for us, that is the ROI on the social media, and then whether or not the sales rep can actually pick up that relationship and cultivate it to turn it into a sale would be the second order consequence of that relationship.
Has that helped you to target your future investments?
Yes.
I think that's much easier to do when you're working with a consumer audience too than it is with physicians, I would think.
I would agree, but I think we also can become much better at tying in, and this kind of back to this morning's presentation around, sales and marketing, is tying in those things much closer in us. For example, taking, what people do on the website and go into the CRM system, measure how they build that into their sales plan, they put an estimate on it. And again, I know it's not because of that action on the website, there was, sales, but at least start to much more justify that it's connected. At the end of the day, we would want to try and get to a point where we can say we made money with our digital assets.
Okay, well, I have two roles. I get to ring the chimes, and I have to keep us moving. So I'm sure we have a lot more to add. I know I have a few thoughts on it. But
we've got one more question over here, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was just more of an answer or comment that going back to your idea that these are all tools, so rather than does Facebook make us money, it's more using it in a spectrum of ways, from the very specific, like sometimes we'll do a Facebook-only campaign and see how many leads we get from it. Or sometimes we'll ask questions, where did you hear about it, or are you even on it? So that's in the middle of information. And then the very far weekend is, I suppose it's just like spending money to pay a person to talk about your product. Is you don't have a direct correlation. I paid him $10,000 to come talk. How many sales did I get? But, so it's using the tool from very specific lead information all the way to very soft information.
Thank you. Yeah, I add that, myself personally, I kind of don't like the term social media. It sounds very kind of that thing. I ask, what's the value of being found? And social is just a way to amplify your message.